All right, so cool. Finally got this on the screen. First question is, who wants the no cursing version of this? Anyone want the no cursing version? Fuck yeah, all right, we're cursing on this. All right, management will get you to curse to release that stress. So been doing this for a bit, and I can get into a little bit more of my background so you can feel a little bit more confident in the vague advice I'm about to give with specifics, which is the management way. But so first in terminology that we're going to be talking about here, IC is individual contributor. This is anyone who's sort of at the leaf node, the edges of a graph, right? So this is anyone who's producing code, designing, things along those lines. Tech lead is someone who's responsible for the technical quality of those people's work. A manager is responsible for those people or other, for their quote unquote life, if you will, within the company. A grand boss is your boss's boss. A LOL is not funny, it's a lead of lead. And this is when you don't have individual contributors reporting to you. And that could be like a senior manager. Senior manager is typically one manager under you and maybe your own team, something along those lines. And then director, you're fully typically at individual, no real individual contributors under you. You may have staff engineers, stuff like that. When you get into VP of engineering, manager, managing VP, head of engineering, CTO, it's still mostly lead of lead within those realms. An asshat is an important term here. So an asshole is a person who's just an asshole. An asshat is ass behavior being able to be put on and off. And we'll get to that a little bit later. All right, so a bit on my background. These days I consult on obscure learning. I do some coaching, looking for a full-time gig again. 2022, I took a year off, break, and I really did this deep dive into decision science, performance of self, and different thinking approaches. Different thinking ended at Burning Man. There's a lot of different thinking. I've promoted and demoted people from management roles, as well as being in such roles myself. So director of engineering at a big company, small company, startups, really early stages of startups, and I started programming during the middle of the dot-com crash, which is actually different than the suppression you're seeing in labor now in the tech industry. And then I advise startups. So my definition of management is being responsible and accountable for people who report to you. You determining if they meet the expectations that allow them to be in their current role or not. At a minimum, ensuring the goals of the company and your organization are met. Ideally, the manager doesn't actually make the decision on firing or not, but quite often that's not the case. My definition of leadership is the map is not the territory. And this is an important, first principle, I think, of leadership, right? So what this means is, you look at Google Maps, it's not going to really show you that well, where all the potholes are. Is it going to be a dotted passing lane or not for this area or not? Is it going to be, a bunch of clowns sitting on the side of the road distracting you and causing you to have an accident, right? That's the actual territory. So leading is getting that group of people through that unknown and that unpredicted territory. This is leading in a way where each individual is competing with their past selves as well, and aligning as a unified team to focus on outcomes over egos. Once again, this is my definition, not standard definition here. When you come to some standard definitions, management winds up a little bit at odds with leadership. The classic definition is management is the process of dealing with or controlling things or people. Leadership is the ability of an individual group of people to influence and guide followers or members of an organization, society, or team. This is control versus influence. And this is a really important concept of whether or not you get to actually choose to yield these as a manager or not. And a lot of factors can come into play, and we'll get into some of those a little bit here. So my hypothesis is never drift into management or leadership. Don't test drive it, trial it, learn or try to stretch into it, graduate into it via an MBA. So an MBA is a Master of Business Administration. It's like a secondary degree that people will go to get. Get hired into or from a prior IC role. So don't take a new job where you're now the first time as being a manager. Be promoted without being asked first. You always want to be asked. Instead of drifting in, treat it as changing careers. Get dedicated, relevant training in your new career. Make sure you respect the management structures and leadership styles where you work. Learning to be a manager where you're not happy with your manager is fucked. You're just screwed. So try not to do that. Make sure you align with your company's performance management system. And so this is how it's determined, people meeting and not meeting expectations, things along those lines. A really helpful thing is if your first time is in an organization that has a notion of terminal levels. So Etsy is a bit of an example of this. I believe their terminal level is senior engineer. You do not have to gain skill to go above senior engineer. You can take your career right at that level. Okay, good. Got some confirmation that that's still hopefully accurate. So that really makes things different when you're leading in an environment where you can just have someone just hang at a level, and it's not the notion of up or out. So that's a little bit of a nice to have, but it's really nice to have. But why, Jeff? Why should we just drift into more money, right? Because management is more money. So we have this cabal of unemployed managers that's bribing me to cover my costs for my next Burning Man trip. But yeah, seriously, why not? Management and leadership by someone who's not prepared for it, it actually hurts humans that we know and love, right? Fuck management, fucks people. And that's just a very real reality of it. And then also, why not to drift into it? It's actually a research science. This isn't some bullshit show where you can just have to go guess and make it up. There's been a lot of people who've studied management and leadership from a lot of different angles. There's actually some science and things to learn about. But first we have to hit a litany of things that you have to be okay with if you want to be a leader. You're okay with figuring out your relationship with power, how you yield it, how you want it yielded on you. This is a thing that anytime that I have someone where they're like, I want to be promoted to a manager, or I inherit a manager onto my teams, we have a distinct conversation about their relationship with power. And to give it some structure, go learn about the author Robert Greene, and his book, 48 Laws of Power. And basically what I do with people is, I sit down and I say, for each law, answer this question, right? Because now you're a manager, now you're in the middle of power, right? When you're an individual contributor, you're sort of at the end of that power hierarchy. So now that you're going to be in the middle of it, am I okay having this power yielded unto me? And how am I comfortable having that power put onto me? Am I okay yielding this power onto others and how, right? So how do you want to own your relationship with power is the key here. So just start there, make sure you're comfortable with power. And you're okay with being isolated by your position of power. You will have private information. You'll be read into it, for example, the fact that your application is going to make, the application you rolled out is going to eliminate 1,500 jobs in another department. You're going to know about that and you're not going to be able to say anything about it until it's done. That just puts you at odds, right? It puts you in this isolated space. You're not going to be able to be trusted at times because of that. When you fire someone where every peer of the person said they did not meet expectations, they could not help the person meet expectations, everyone agrees that it's pulling the team down. You make the decision to fire the person or say to the person you have to go find another team, there's a pretty good chance they're still not going to trust you. And that's just sort of the nature of that one. And it's just an aspect of hierarchy. Not micromanaging. I bet you're all sitting here being like, I've never micromanaged. Bullshit. Not macromanaging is fucking hard, right? Because it's being comfortable in the unknown and in the silence between when you ask someone to do something and they deliver it to you, right? So your ability to sit back and let them drive something where in the first couple minutes it can look like, holy shit, this is gonna turn into a fucking train wreck. And being cool enough to sit down and say, no, let me see a little bit. Here's what I'm looking for. Let's see. And it's just that being cool with it. It's knowing when things are too quiet that helps you learn to not micromanage. You're okay with not leading by being only technical. You can't do it. You can't lead by doing the architecture for everyone and everyone fills in the blanks. You can't lead by being the one who codes the proof of concept every time. You can't lead by coding every day. You have to learn how to manage, right? If you don't learn how to have your team do these things, they don't know how to grow, they don't know how to have ownership, and you won't be promoted because you're not putting someone in place to stand up behind you, and you just have a weak team structurally. So you can't be purely technical. You can do both, but you can't be purely technical. You're okay with firing people. This is the basic reality of this, right? And it's the ultimate judgment of someone's talent and potential. And the real reality here is you're gonna be a part of someone's worst 10 days of their life, right? Like, it's just there. You look at the stats on this, look at the numbers on this, firing someone is often a traumatic event to someone receiving it, even when done well. So you have to be cool with being a part of that. Oh, you're okay with determining that you're being manipulated when being asked for something, and deciding that you should support the ask because it's the right ask. You talk like a motherfucker with a double blind here. There's artful techniques on how to handle this. We won't get into that, but this is like to give you an idea of some of the complexity you wind up with. And you're okay with you now as a manager being promoted means you're accountable for more, but you have less things you control, but you control them with more certainty. And you're okay with every promotion meaning you handle fewer problems, but they're more complicated because even more people could not solve them, or even more people created them. All right, as you're getting promoted, law is no longer funny, right? Because you're in lead of lead, so you get the mourn the loss of that one. Promotion to managing leads of leads is a whole new skill set, almost like a new career, right? So like this is where your people are managing other people. And it's welcome to the world of strategy without planning, right? Because you have to let your other people come up with a plan. You may set some goals, some objectives, some outlines of it. But so you need to know what a good plan looks like, but allow people to have enough ownership in it. So it's indirect leadership. It's also quality of message delivered versus what is heard in their heads at a much larger scale. So quality of communication takes a massive jump up once you're into lead of lead. All right, and you're okay with knowing your leadership style and how you learn to manage will dictate where you can and can't be employed, and there's no standards for leadership styles, right? So what you control will differ from company to company. Some companies you'll be able to control things with a budget. Some places you won't. Some places you'll be able to fire. Some places you won't. Some places you'll be able to reorganize your team very easily within your hierarchy. Other ones you won't. This is going to determine what skills you build as a leader. Hiring leaders is very high risk. Bad leader can destroy 30 people in months. And so this gets even more specific the higher you get in leadership. And if you think lead code sucks, wait until a day of behavioral interviews and psychological tests. Really, like, it's sort of insane the battery of things you go against for this. You're okay with the two main sources of your confidence being the psychic you hired and the Ouija board you stole from your kid, right? So remember the thing about micromanagement, right? You'll learn the art of trust but verify, but not micromanage, right? And so you're going to be reading the tea leaves, all these types of like vague shit. And you got to get cool with that. And you're okay with aging out as your technical skills deteriorate the higher you get, so you're trapped in leadership and defined by the tools your company let you use to lead, unless you can take a pay cut or months with no income, survive the serotonin drop of being lower in the hierarchy. This is a real fucking thing, all right? We'll get into it a little bit more, but serotonin increases the higher you are in the hierarchy. When you drop out of that position, it's like guaranteed some notion of depression, right? But it's the chemical version of it, not the anger turned inwards, self-loathing version of depression. And you're okay with managing people who make more money than you. This is just a reality with it, and you gotta be cool with it. And the larger the number of people under your management, the more the human condition you're exposed to. Shitty fucking families, breakups, cats dying, layoffs, violence, evil fucking people. Every layer up, you're exposed to more of this human condition. And being a human is fucking hard, and now it's your problem. Finally, and you're not okay with being an asshat and lacking self-awareness. Asshat, right? Be an asshole at work, but be cool out of work. I've seen people do this. fucks them up. You gotta find that way to be sort of like your genuine self in these leadership roles, where it just causes some extreme turmoil for fucking people that I've seen try to do this. Lacking self-awareness as a leader, awareness is gonna be, your self-awareness is gonna be basically everything. And it's promotion only when you've consented. Make an intentional choice and have a plan. It can be quite worth it. How could this possibly be worth it? Well, so there is this literally the serotonin aspect, right? Like that's your 5-HT receptor. Look how happy they are, right? Like they're like little like party symbols. That's an actual representation of what they look like. But there is actually there is another litany of things that you want to have in your life in order to feel like it's worth it. You want to have a major role in someone's growth or new skill level, right? Like this can be like a really core memory for you as a leader when you enable someone to have this, right? When you set up the situation that someone can get that new skill. Someone finding security in their income, like this is a really key moment in life for someone, right? So if you really instill people to really understand their job well and their role well, they get just more confident in their income, in their finances. Even today when tech is sort of on like a little bit of a downside, like if you've done a good job of making sure that they know what they know, it's a really good thing. People thank you even in failure because you led, grow, and learn grace, right? So failure handled well leads to growth, right? And as a leader, that's what you really set the tone of, is what does failure actually cost? You want to have the reward of growing the company and meeting the needs of its customers, right? So like you will have a direct relationship with these things in some pretty marketable ways, especially your teams. Especially understanding the relationship with customers, I think grows nicely fit with it. You want to have even harder problems to solve the harder you get, right? Man, when you've hired 50 really freaking sharp people, the problem that's showing up on your table is some hard shit. It's fun, right? And setting solid strategy and stuff like that, it's really a compelling thought problem. Finally, you want to have more money. I mean, let's just face it, right? Like, you get paid for this, you get paid for the suffering. So what's dedicated training? Especially because I don't like MBAs. So I have self-taught background, so I have a bias a little bit against education being necessary. But MBAs, they wind up being these high extrovert and low conviction people. And I don't know if it's that the program selects for this behavior in people or it turns people into this. But everyone that I've seen coming out of MBA programs, Stern, whichever program you want to talk about, this just seems to be this common trend. And low conviction as a leader, I consider it really toxic. So start by reading up on how to do it. Do a leadership ride-along. And in particular, you want your manager to bring you into calibration. This is when other managers figure out what the bar is for different skills and stuff like that. And you want to see performance management. Almost no one fucking does this. So you're going to be asking for something that's sort of weird, right? And you just be like, yeah, just give me a thing to sign. I'll promise to keep all of this private and not share it, blah, blah, blah. But try to get yourself in that room. Also, watch out what you inherit, right? Watch out if you're going to be managing a team for big drama, PIPs, right? Anyone that's on a performance improvement plan, that basically means someone on your team is on the way out, so you're inheriting someone else's plan. It's really a shitty thing. It's the same as like inheriting a failing project. Know what happens if you're not successful. That's a really big thing. So what to read? Leadership and management resources. I'll share these this post somewhere too. Go look up Ramsey Repose, otherwise known as Michael Bopp, and his RLS Slack community. It's about 30,000 software engineering leaders and senior staff people and some engineers in surrounding talent areas. Unbelievable community. You can almost just basically stop here and not have to look at some of these other things. Leadership Library Dev has a really good selection of books. Other books that I just want to call out, Mythical Man Month, I think it's still worth reading, even though it's from the 60s and talking about mainframe development. Peopleware, it was a staple of leadership for Microsoft in the early days. Google Rework, when you look it up, it's going to be in Japanese. Don't worry, it's not a scam. It's just evidently run by their Japanese team. But this was a whole bunch of studies that they did on the effectiveness of teams. There was a famous time in Google's history where they fired all managers. and they had to reconvince Larry Page and them to bring managers back. And a lot of this research was about that. I highly recommend the book, the Thin Book of Trust. So trust is a huge factor in leadership. Any of the writings of Gerald Weinberg, he mostly talks about consulting and stuff along those lines, but his approach to technical leadership in those realms is still really solid. Getting into a little bit of some obscure books, pattern language, town building and construction, it's literally around real world architecture and how to deal with it, but it shows how systems and things need to be approached and approachable. Understanding this will help you relationships with your architects, with your engineering teams, with product partners, everything. Once you start getting into lead of lead, I highly recommend reading the book Super Forecasting, The Art and Science of Prediction, because you're going to be making strategies and predictions about what's going to happen. You need to know how fickle they are, right? You're going to have to be confident when you shouldn't be confident is what it comes down to. Getting to really advanced topics, cybernetics, gets into complexity theories and some different things along those lines. The writings of Elliot Jacks, so he's one of these people that did actually research work into leadership. So he has Social Power and the CEO and Requisite Organization. They're insanely hard reads. They're like index numbering schemes, referencing each other and shit like that. But it's worth it if you want to get into bigger things. Dialectic thinking, which then turns into meta thinking, which is actually a book. It's just how to think differently and process things differently. You need to have a plan for success. You need a rock solid 90-day plan written by you and your boss, approved by your grand boss. It's a good book for this, the first 90 days. You want to have weekly one-on-ones with your boss, and monthly skip level with your grand boss, dedicated to how you're leading, right? So this one-on-one should just be talking about how you're doing your leadership stuff, not maybe about the other shit that you handle in your one-on-ones. You want to have weekly one-on-ones with people on your team and a good psychological safety system. If we get into some time, I'll be able to talk a little bit about that. A coach, preferably someone from outside the company, and ideally a mentor. Right, so the difference between a coach and a mentor. A coach is there to make you win. A mentor is there to show you what growth and wisdom can look like. Right, so they're not invested in your wins, so they can give you advice that may hurt you in the short term, but benefit you in the long term. The coach is there to get you to win today. Special cases. In a startup, and it's growing so fast that one day you wake up as being a manager. Company struggles and downsizes, and now you're the manager. Shit happens. Set up the 90-day plan as soon as possible, but compensate with knowledge from outside the company, right? So you need that coach who has experience with high-growth startups or turnarounds. They're out there. There's different forums where you can hire these people. Get a mentor who is where you want to be later in life and career, right? So like, you're in the blur. You're in the mix of shit. This is a non-happy path to learning how to be a manager. You need someone showing you some of that broader future activity. Once you have the basics down, right? You've been managing for a year or so maybe. Go learn sales, learn product management. Get to know how these people, get to know these people at your job well. Learn what it takes for them to be successful, right? Like, sorry, like if you're not working well with them, your engineering team is sort of useless. I'm a big fan of the book, The Machine. It's a different type of sales than most people run. It's a non-commission-based ecosystem that they sort of describe within there. But I think it's worth reading to be able to use as a way to understand your sales a little better. Unless, of course, they happen to actually follow that. From the product side, I worked with and highly recommend the work of John Cutler at A Beautiful Mess. I think he does. He puts out a shit ton of content. So anytime you can find one of his condensed views of it, way better. And he's just a hyper person. Some of my speculation on leadership in tech in 2027. Product management and software engineering will begin to merge. We've seen these trends before in software engineering, where you had to move to like full stack software engineers. You've seen DevOps get pulled more into the traditional engineering stack and things along those lines. If you look at some of the stats around some of the Copilot tools, making engineers 10% more efficient, where does that 10% time go? I have a bit of a prediction in my head that you're actually going to see the product owner skill set merge into software engineers. It's also one of the more expensive frictions in relationships between people. Getting the translated perspective of a project manager into a software engineer's head it's a very costly friction. So having it all in one head, I think, is going to be a real thing. And we got a little bit of some extra time here, I think, hopefully, right? So I think I have until what? Okay, cool. So we're going to talk about like this thing that I care a lot about, but I haven't super codified, so I call this my approach. But these are the thin parts that I think are important. So outcome over ego, especially outsized outcomes when you're dealing with outsized egos. It means the work of the team is more important than the work of the individual, right? And it means you're measuring the team, not so much measuring the individual. For the individual, it really comes down to what is their pursuit of their personal mastery or their passion, right? Like it's really getting it so that like when you're talking with the person on the team, how are you competing with your past self? Not competing with others, right? You're working collectively as a team for certain outcomes, but you're competing with your past self. I found this to be a really, really beneficial and strong model to be in place. I think for achieving these things, Slack is a critical factor. I'm not talking about the app. I'm talking about time in your schedule. If you and your team are 100% booked, you will not reach, in my opinion, as outsized of an outcome as you possibly could. You can still have a really great outcome, but I think you can do better if you have Slack. When you have Slack, you have more time to deal with other people's ego problems. And so that helps you reallocate and redirect into the folks of the team. And really what the goal with a lot of this is, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. That's a really hard concept for a lot of different leaders to be comfortable with, right? Because everyone's just trying to measure everything with metrics, right? Like you got all these different scores, you got Dora, you got all these different methods for like trying to score the performance. But the real thing that I try to look for is, are we going smooth? Because if we're going smooth, that means over the long haul, we're going fast, compared to it being rough and turbulent. Psychological safety is key, okay? So this is private spaces and time that occurs often. So these are your one-on-ones and your skip levels, right? This gives you the place to find out what some people are not willing to say in public, but they're willing to say in private. You hold these one-on-ones even if people say nothing. You make sure the space is there. I have spent 8 months with people in one-on-ones where they have nothing to say, and then finally they have something important to say. And that's what these spaces are there for. You need to have a solid approach to moving private information back out to the team or broader teams, right? So this is obviously like deeply personal things. This is where like someone finds out, hey, my mom's dying. Like, I'm not going to be able to be my full self, my normal performance for a bit here. Or it's someone sitting down here saying like, I just really can't bring up, issues around design because I'm constantly being shit on in all the team meetings. Like, your job is to now work with that person and say, okay, how do we bring this out so that it's a team problem and so that the team can start to work on it, right? If you solve this behind the doors, your team doesn't grow as well. The higher you get, you need to have a solid approach for scuttlebutt. The thing I learned from one of my CEOs, Current, and basically what happens is, right, there's always these rumors, there's always these speculations going on. You want a clear channel to hear what those are, and then it's the same principle. You figure out with that person, how do we get the scuttlebutt handled at a team level and have that conversation. You need to have a strong technical roadmap, right? Like, as a leader, like, you really need to know what this is. You need to show that hard things are directionally possible, right? Remember, the map is not the territory, so you just need to show the direction on it. It needs to be rather convincing. And you have to work with your teams, team's partners, right? Product, things like that, to move to measurable strategy, right? In the product world, they'll talk about it as like a feature factory. You don't want that. That shit sucks. So if you can move to measurable strategy and actually moving a needle on things, that's way better. And you want to be able to focus on what it takes to evolve the end users. right? Like sometimes you just can't drop something on an end user's plate. You have to do intermediary steps to get better success and outcome with it. Discuss failure. This is not toxic positivity, right? This is not everyone gets a fucking reward bullshit. This is actually having a quote unquote upfront, honest conversation around failures when they happen. It's retrospective, it's being done all the time so that there's at least a room to calibrate, right? The retrospective is typically on routine, right? Postmortem is when you've identified a failure. Etsy and their blameless postmortems are a great way to start on some of these things. They go as far as supporting failure by every year having a 3-arm sweater award. And so it's literally a shirt with 3 arms on it for whoever had the biggest failure. And actually Etsy across the board when it comes to failure is fantastic. When Chad Bitterson came in from Yahoo, he brought in some of the top failure guys in research and science, and they integrated a lot of that into their lifestyle. From what I hear, it's still sort of roughly there, but yeah, like their writings on failure really changed software development in some interesting ways. You want to find your company's terms of bankruptcy, right? So go read up on what bankruptcy is for a business, chapter 11, 13, and 7, or your 3 main ones. You want to find out what those are for within your business, right? Can you declare bankruptcy on an idea? Or do you have to grind it all the way past fucking failure, deliver on failure, and then we can do whatever bullshit, right? Like if you see something's failing, you need to be able to declare bankruptcy on it. Some companies cannot handle this. So that's like also a little bit of a thing to watch out for. So there's the end, right? So like I'm open for questions, debate. If you want to chat later, yeah. So I don't know. I just laid a bunch of shit on you. Raise your hand. Yeah.
What's scuttlebutt?
Scuttlebutt is rumors.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
That's quite a broad presentation, but I just had a couple of points. You can't really ask to be promoted. You have to show that you're ready for it, but your company is going to promote you when they want you to be promoted. It comes down to that, really.
Correct. And my argument is they should have a plan of teaching you when it's that time, when they feel it's that time.
And the other thing was that you said be careful about being promoted to clean up other people's messes. But the fact is, many promotions are a result of other people's messes.
Your first time of management.
Pardon?
I would say that's for your first time into management.
Yeah.
Not
Okay.
taking those on for your first time in management.
Okay, but.
Sorry, I wasn't clear on that.
I was just going to add that many promotions are a result of other people's screw-ups, and they need a brand new, fresh face.
And so there, what I would do is I'd pull a manager from another team who's established to take over the damaged team, and I'd give the good team to the person who has to be promoted.
Sure, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, cool. Thank you for pushing on those. Anything else? Yeah.
So I'm kind of moving from IT into like a technical tech lead.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to hear your like definition of a tech lead. Like I'm kind of interested in the actual engineering, and I want to do a little managing people
Sure.
as possible. So
Yeah, so in no sense is it changes from company to company and need of a team, right? If you have a team that's just grinding out like bullshit code, that role isn't as stressful sometimes, is as significant as let's say you're actually doing something that's technically challenging or a bit new. And so what I lean on from my technical leads is, are they able to tell me that we're confidently building things the right way? I don't care that they know if we're building the right thing. That's a little bit higher up. But are they building it right? Is it going to meet some of those future expectations, right? And this is a part of my job as a manager. I need to tell you how long that solution needs to live for. Now that solution only needs to live for 6 months, make it fragile as shit. We have the budget and the money to fix it if we prove the idea is right. No, what you're building needs to work for the next 20 years, right? So it's knowing as a tech lead, what are those expectations of the solution and its technical duration, right? If it's someone comes to me and you come to me as a tech lead and say, I want to do this in this like brand new freaking language, you better have a damn solid reason why no other language can do it. Things along those lines, right? Like I'm gonna really do some pressure on like things that are just vanity for resumes. Other things that I expect from a tech lead, they're gonna help me a lot on calibration. Is the talent where I need it today? Is the talent going where I need it to be tomorrow? They're gonna really help me with some of that. They may not be in the calibration sessions, but all of my tech leads, I'm having serious conversations with them throughout the year around where talent is. Anything else?
Kind of branching off that, the company I work for has a role called a chapter lead. And it kind of, I guess, takes on some of the ensuring like the development and growth of the developers across separate product teams are, I guess, going well. They collaborate with each other to share knowledge, skill sets. I guess, what are your thoughts on that type of role?
So those titles I've seen often for them are like staff or principal engineers, right? Where at a director level, I have one reporting into me and they're going across my teams for technical influence. And then when necessary, if I have teams that are outside of mine, I'm leaning on them to influence other teams, right? And bring those influences in. Be like, hey, we just wrote this thing using Commando. We shouldn't have used Commando. I just learned from talking to this other team. Bring those things back in. But that's what I'm sort of looking at for those roles, right? Like, how do they influence? How do they perform some coaching to the individual contributors, right? Like, if there's an engineer who's sitting down and they're like, hey, I want to get way better at understanding columnar data stores in that ecosystem, and you happen to have an expertise in that, I'm expecting you to do some coaching in there. And there's some gray areas with these things, so there's danger, right? So for those types of roles, I highly recommend keeping a brag sheet for yourself going, so that you know at any given time, here's the shit that I did and I accomplished. Because a lot of it's not going to be visible. So I highly recommend for those. I recommend for everyone to have a brag sheet, but I really recommend for some of those roles where you push here, you may be the push on like a very long chain of dominoes, right? And so that origin push that story gets lost, right, for that first push. So I really always think for some of those types of roles, it's important to keep your information aware of that and being comfortable with your boss and being like, yeah, I started that fucking chain. That's me. We can thank them all for having fallen in line with it, but I kicked it. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
It really resonated with me that, growth for individual is how far they've come from their past self. But how do you reconcile like growth within the individual with the skills matrix for a company?
Yeah.
Right, like we all bring different experience and background. Like someone could have grown
Absolutely.
along, but it's still not meeting the next step.
Absolutely. And this is honestly where the fun, hard conversations happen, right? When the passion no longer aligns with what's available, where the future of the business is going. And that's where you sit down here and you're like, hey, is there a path that you continue to find some of that mastery within what we're doing? Cool. If not, let us go find you another place. And let's also figure out who should come in and fill in for you.
It's hard.
But you're doing it as an option, right? Both parties get to choose. Right? I'm not sitting here and saying you have to be constantly competing with your past self. That's the best form. But you can choose to do other things. Right? If you're in a cycle of life where focus on work can't be what it was, that's what comes into play here. And sometimes a company can tolerate it, and sometimes they can't. And I think it's better to have the conversation than to wind up already off the cliff. So it is hard. It's hard for both parts. But this is where the psychological safety comes in, right? And this is also, I guess, maybe a little bit of a fork when the answer of this is, not every manager is perfect for every employee, right? I can be great for 3 people in this room, okay for 40, and horrible for 5. And it doesn't have anything to do, it's just the style being problematic. And so you're never going to get it 100%. I've just never found that. But you hope to be at least reasonably in the green, reasonably in the yellow, so that you can try to have those conversations with people. But it is hard. That help or, okay. Sure. Sure, so I've done remote a lot. Capital One was like a rare exception for me being in office until COVID happened. The conversation around remote, I think, actually starts with how asynchronous is everyone, right? And that's what I think is really the definition that's in play. How long do you expect people to be able to operate without any interaction with other people? And so that degree of async is going to set a huge amount of the styles of leadership that you're going to have within it. If everything's across global time zones and it's all about then like handoff of information, things along those lines, putting RFPs up that people can read on their own time, right? So you're playing way ahead. And then I think the other really important thing for remote is we actually get a lot chemically of being in the room with fellow humans, right? Like neurologically, chemically, emotionally, all these things. So it's finding the times for when you get together. I think that's really important, even when you're hugely asynchronous, right? Like, and I think it's also being deliberate with those times. Is this just social, or is it strategic and social? And I've never said just strategic. Because once you get people who have been remote from each other for a long time, if your goal is to have a 100% strategic time together, you will fail to meet that goal just because of the power of humans wanting to fucking connect. So that's my general thinking on it. And it's a huge difference, right? Like when I was at Capital One, we all went remote. I basically took a list of all of my managers and I wrote them out on who needs physical presence in order to have influence. And whoever was high on that score, I knew I had to work with, to figure out how they were going to be confident in their jobs. And I did the same thing for my peers and bosses. I scored them in my own rubric of how much I saw them leading by physical presence and physical control of room, and recognized that they'd be in a weakened state. Hopefully that helped a bit.
And so we're at time now. We're ready for lunch. If there's more questions, I'm sure you'll be.
Yeah, no, I'm totally up for that.
I'm going to let you go to get some lunch. Thank you very much.